Welcome to eShe Summit, South Asia Union Summit led by women. Wow, what a wonderful event this has been. 2 days and 50 women, incredible women. And we are now at the last session of the summit where we focus on youth and empowering humanistic political leaders. In this session, our esteemed panelists shall discuss why we not only need more women in leadership to ensure fair representation of half the population, but we also need more humanistic leaders who will put people before politics. Contrary to the protocol, I am taking the liberty to introduce the moderator for this session first because she has been a personal mentor to me and has spent a lot of time and energy in guiding me in my journey from an enthusiastic but very raw Indo-Pak peace activist to one who feels so much more confident in playing a leadership role in upcoming peace-building projects. Beena ji, who is moderating the session, is a journalist, filmmaker, editor, university lecturer, media consultant, and peace builder. She's the founder-curator of South Asia Peace Action Network, or SAPAN. And one of the most vocal advocates for India-Pakistan peace, Beena ji carries forward her work as head of Aman Ki Asha, which is an immensely popular initiative started jointly by Young Group of Pakistan and Times of India into SAPAN to include the entire South Asia. We're so happy to have you here, Beena ji.
Thank you for your kind introduction. Thank you, Pragya. Lovely to see you.
Our first panelist is Tara Krishnaswamy from Bengaluru, India. Tara is a software director, activist, author, and co-founder of Political Shakti, a women's collective, and of Citizens for Bengaluru. Tara is both a dreamer and a doer. Through her organization, Political Shakti, which is a non-partisan group dedicated to enabling more women find the path to political power, she endeavors to create a world where women will have their rightful representation and equal numbers as lawmakers. Tara, your voice is very powerful and our audience is looking forward to hear you.
It's my pleasure entirely and my honor. Thank you.
Joining us from the US is Peggy Mohan, linguistic expert, author and educator of Indian origin. Peggy is a former professor of linguistics at Jawaharlal Nehru University and Jamia Millia Islamia, New Delhi, and she has developed educational television content for children in the past. Her latest book, Wanderers, Kings, Merchants, the story of India through its languages, challenges the myth of racial purity in India by looking at the migration patterns and intermixing among the larger
Pragya seems to have frozen.
Oops.
Ekta, I think somebody needs to step in because Pragya is frozen.
Yeah.
Yes, sorry about that. We've been having a few internet issues today. I'm just going to bring on all the panelists here. We have Saba Gul and we have Vani Tripathi. I've just brought everybody here.
Yeah. So joining us from US is also Saba Gul, a technology entrepreneur, investor, and feminist activist. Saba, who was raised in Pakistan, is an MIT-educated entrepreneur building at the intersection of technology and impact. She has launched companies and led teams in several sectors such as health, e-commerce, and logistics. And her work experiences span most of the world, including Silicon Valley, South Asia, and Central and Eastern Europe. She is also an angel investor and a startup and leadership mentor who serves on the investment committees of venture funds. Saba has spoken before at the United Nations, Harvard Business School, TEDx, and World Bank on entrepreneurship and gender. And we are so privileged to have you here today. Finally, we have Vani Tripathi Tikoo, actor, producer, columnist, and socio-political activist from India. Vani is one of the youngest ever members of the Central Board of Film Certification, which the layman knows as the Censor Board. Having acted in about 50 plays, over 40 TV serials, and 6 films, she founded India's first state-run drama school, the Madhya Pradesh Natya Vidyalaya, in 2011. As a socio-political activist, Her campaigns and outreach programs have focused on encouraging women's participation in politics and in involving youth for finding solutions to challenges India faces. For example, in the arena of education, employment, and empowerment. So now I'm going to bow out of this wonderful conversation waiting to happen and hand over the stage to Beena ji. Thank you.
Thank you, Pragya, for those wonderful introductions. And I'm so privileged and honored to be here with this diverse panel of amazing women doing amazing things at the tail end of this. Really, I don't want to use the word amazing again, but really it is amazing what Ekta and Pragya and others have pulled together, this South Asian summit led by women. Which is one of our dreams, is to have a visa-free South Asia. One of our dreams is to have a region where we can have peace and cooperation, and where people can trade, travel, and meet without being branded as traitors by anybody. But because I know we are running short of time, what I'm going to do, Pragya has already introduced all of you. So I'm going to call on you and ask you to say just a few words about what you do and how we can, to address the issue of this that is at hand. How do we empower the youth to become the kind of leaders that we need for a humanistic South Asia, essentially? So I'm going to start with Tara. Actually, let me start with Peggy, because you work with children, Peggy, and
Yes.
I think it's so exciting that you are working as a linguist. And so one of the reasons that I find this panel so exciting is the diversity that we have here. We have somebody who's from the stage, we have political Shakti, we have entrepreneur, and we have a linguist. So, and what is the connection here? The connection is the issue that we are talking about. And of course, it all starts at home, it starts with children. So I'm going to ask Peggy that as a linguist, what do you think we can do to empower children to develop as leaders and as youth taking these issues forward? So.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Beena. Basically, as a linguist, I've been working on how languages are established in India, how they come up, and how children eventually get to know their own languages and get streamed into whichever niche in society they're fated to belong to. What we have had in India, in South Asia, for millennia is a sort of an apartheid system where the elite speak a different language and the poor speak either small dialects or languages which are not so empowered. We have seen this continue in particular after independence, because when the British were here, yes, there were people who needed to also know English. But now all of a sudden, after independence, we find the need for English as a marker of elitism completely going all out. We are finding the very small children admitted into elite schools, and then after that, it becomes necessary to have affirmative action. So even very small children who never speak English at home entered into schools where they understand absolutely nothing and sit for years on end, occupying the bottom 25% of the class and making things look good that we are integrating them. But what we're finding is these children and the other children who don't come to school are, in linguistic terms, separated from the children who we wish to be leaders, which is to say, our children who speak English.
Peggy, just to quickly come in there, the English is still the language of power in South Asia.
Yes, it is.
And what you're saying essentially is that these children who come in and who are forced, and it actually reminds me a little bit of what happened in Australia and even in the United States and Canada when the colonists came in and they took the children away actually from their families and forced them into because to co-opt them essentially. But now, how do we go forward from this? How do you see it being, what do you think should change to get these children into the mainstream, as it were?
I'm not comfortable with the word should. There are a lot of wishful thinking. There are two possibilities of how things can happen.
Yes.
Either South Asia can turn into a remake of South Africa and the Philippines, where a few people know a little of their own languages or their original ancestral languages and keep them up for just very casual conversations, and everything else de facto is in English. And you see an erasure of diversity, which is what I don't hope. And the other is that we find a way to, at least at children's levels, integrate them so that rich children and poor children are not complete strangers to each other. I think that a certain amount of the hatred that we find in our society is because we've been divided from a very early age, do not know each other at all, have every reason to suspect each other, and that from children, at least at that age, there needs to be some form of connection so that even if later on their careers take them in different directions, they know something about each other, they can communicate directly. It's more important in a way for an elite child and a very ordinary child in one part of India to be able to communicate than for an elite child in India to communicate with a child in Silicon Valley. That may be nice, but it's not going to help the local situation, local politics, and the kind of ugly sentiments that are beginning to come up, where we have actually let these people languish, and not languish because of not knowing English, but because of the upshot of not knowing English is not having access to the best jobs. So we have streamed children in terms of who are going to get everything and who are going to get as little as possible. As long as you have that kind of apartheid system, to wish for children to do something is to at least means that you at least have to start connecting them so that they know something about each other, each other's aspirations, and that can begin to think a little bit freely and for a start
maybe
about what they want.
Maybe as an overall community rather than us and them.
Yes.
Yeah. Let me now come to Saba, because I think this is really interesting. That I would like to. I'm really curious to hear how, in your field, Saba, in the field of entrepreneurship, and you've done such groundbreaking work in entrepreneurship. Can you talk a little bit about your work, and if you can link some of the ideas that Peggy has talked about and the theme of this panel to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, my background is in technology, my academic training, and a lot of my professional experience. But I've sort of applied that to building products and building companies and building solutions for the problems we see on the ground. And I think that over and over again, what I've seen in building companies and building teams is that it's so important to think about an alternate or imagine an alternate form of leadership. I want to sort of link this to what Peggy was saying in the context of, Peggy was speaking very much in the context of access, that a loss of access that comes, because of class. And I also want to link it to other factors, right? Obviously, such as gender. But I think that there's a certain privilege that I see in leadership where it's so clear that the impact of planetary and economic and societal harm is just not distributed equally. Right? Like whether we look at the climate crisis, whether we look at COVID right now, whether we look at educational sort of, lack of education access, whether we look at sort of anything that is, happening, it's that there's an insulation that I feel comes both from class and from gender. Women are very much more affected by all of these crises, whether it's war or terrorism or whatever we're seeing in the world. So I think I do want to sort of link this and bring our awareness to South Asia as an example of, Pakistan and India, unfortunately, both as examples of leaders who very much feel that privilege and that insulation, and who have really more and more so with time become so out of touch with populations that now, we start to feel that they are not only not representative of us, but that our countries start to feel like they don't belong to us anymore in some way. And so I just sort of, from my end, I want to talk about what challenging what leadership should look like, the qualities and the traits that I almost feel like we should be looking for, and the red flags that we should be talking about in leadership, right? So I think that what I see just front and foremost is just hubris, is this arrogance, is this sort of, unfortunate to say, but a combination of hubris and ignorance in some ways, right? So you're out of touch with population, and on top of it, there's an arrogance of we know best. And I can speak more for Pakistan, but I think our Prime Minister has become an example of someone who is the know-all leader while not knowing all, right? So I think that what I want to challenge is, looking at examples of leadership globally, where leadership is about trust, leadership is about compassion, leadership is about empathy. And I think COVID has really brought to front the styles of leadership and how they contribute to exacerbating crises or improving crises. And the way that gender plays in my view, is that I think that our style of leadership, I don't think there's any such thing as a masculine or feminine quality, but in the conventional sense of how we have come to view it, I think our style of leadership has become very hyper-masculine. And so it's about posturing, and it's about arrogance, and it's about competition, and it's about I am right, and it's about viewing populations with distrust and saying we don't want to share the facts with the population. We just want to pretend that we're doing fine and we're great and we're the best leaders that this country's ever seen. And so this is where I think I want to bring the discussion to from my side. And I think when it comes to younger people, honestly, what I've seen is that I'm in my 30s. When I look at people in their 20s and in their teens, I feel so much hope. That's actually where I feel hope. I feel like the level of activism and involvement and care that this generation has for how they want to be involved is unprecedented. And the youth activism that you see around the globe is unprecedented. So I think it is us who need to challenge, our notions of leadership and allow them to lead the way that they want to lead. I think they know how to lead, guys.
Yes, I agree. And actually, I will come back to you on that, and I want to ask you how you apply that in your work. But I'm going to come now. I'm going to come now to Vani Tripathi, who is engaged in a field that is very close to my heart as an actor and director, because the very first article I ever wrote, Vani, was a theater review. And I've also done a little bit of acting myself, but my first articles were about theater and art and culture, and that's such an important thing. And I want to ask you how in your field, you must be working with younger actors and directors and producers also, and in your field, how do you mentor, and how do you encourage or develop the kind of leadership we're talking about that is not the hyper masculine one that Saba just described, and something towards something more empathetic? And how does that play out in the world of theater?
Thank you so much, Beena. And it's almost like a biradar sitting in front of me, since you belong to the world of stage and theater and writing. I want to take a thread from what Peggy Mohan said. One of the other aspects of my work is working with children and theater and education company at the National School of Drama in Delhi, where we started alternate education and learning methodologies for children. And having said that, you see, when we talk about leadership, we always look at the top-down approach. We never look at the bottom-up approach, in most countries of South Asia, not just India and elsewhere. Because the whole concept of academia, going through exams, being competitive is so important, in our societies, that the whole collaboration between a parent, a school, a scholastic situation for a child, and learning itself, becomes absolutely fragmented. So when we talk about humanizing leadership, which is one of the aspects we are supposed to be talking about today in this session, we can only humanize it when we actually humanize society and we humanize people around us. As adults, our minds are so cluttered with so much stuff, so much angst, so much frustration and failures of our own that we forget. We dump those to our children, to our young people, and it almost looks like walking shadows of failures, that we, pass on representatively to, children and young people around us. So as far as my work is concerned, I do absolutely radical work. I do unboxing, using theater and film as a medium for empowerment and education. And when I say unboxing, the very screen that we are seeing right now is a box. The classroom is a box. The table is a box. The whole concept of sitting in a classroom is also a box. So unsquaring and unboxing learning methodologies and creating initiatives which may be round or which are probably semicircle, very physically speaking, in context, in content, is what we should be doing. Also looking at the arts, looking at the whole idiom of using theater and empowerment and cinema as a emancipatory medium has worked tremendously well in a country like India. Let me say to you that I was very successfully and fortunately a part of a program which Barry John started with the National School of Drama 3 decades ago when I was a child, and we started using the role of role play as in creating a role where everything which is bothering you, whether it is a challenge, whether it's a problem, does not find solution theoretically or as a written down piece of paper. But actually, role play in theater is such a cathartic method of letting it out and creating wider collaborations. So, as far as the idiom of using arts, theater, and cinema collaboratively is concerned, I think there has been path-breaking work in various countries of the world, including India. The only problem is there are deeper collaborations required, with the countries around, very much in the continent, whereas young people can talk to each other. Let me also say to you, India is a very young country. More than 72% of the population of India right now is under 35, and all % are women. I would like to bring the focus to women. Let me say this to you, that also in terms of the governance structures and the leadership structures of India has done tremendously well at the bottom. That's why I said the top-down approach is highly, deeply flawed and malfunctioned. When you look at the panchayat levels, which is the local self-governing body sector units of the country, whether you look at that community development sectors, women have done tremendously well. And a word called quota, which is kosher in the West, has worked tremendously well in terms of a socially leveraging position for women in India. We reserved local self-governing seats, for women in India almost more than 2 decades ago. And today you have leaders, community leaders, panchayat heads who are women, who have gotten out of that whole adage of only knowing 5 or 15 men around them. They are people who take governing, who become governance examples because policy has become a part of their lives. Let me also say intrinsically that when you are in a village in India, in rural India, it's very interesting to note that women of the village would know which child needs healthcare, which family needs a certain kind of community building, and which hospital or what kind of healthcare is required for the village community to benefit. A recent study by Harvard said...
Sorry, Vani, I'm going to stop you. So I'm going to stop you there because we'll come back to that. Those are really important points that you've made. I love the idea of role play, and I think that the point you flagged about women and the local governance is a very, very important point. And I also want to flag that the issue of quotas, which we also have in Pakistan, that was started, some years also about the same time as India actually, and it has really worked very well, even though it is tokenism, but that tokenism leads to more change because as the process continues. So those are really valuable points you've made. Thank you so much for flagging those points. I want to come to Tara Krishnaswamy because you've got these two really interesting initiatives, Political Shakti, and I want to know what that actually means, and Citizens for Bengaluru. And Bengaluru or Bangalore is a city I've never been to, but very close to my heart because I have a lot of very, very dear friends there, and I just have this mystical idea about Bangalore, and I just would love to visit. And to that point, I want to just add something you said about the National School of Drama, Vani, which is also an institute that is looked up to and admired, and the NSD has done amazing work. And I just want to and you talked about deeper collaborations, I just want to also flag the point that until some years ago, there used to be collaborative theatre exchanges between India and Pakistan, and very dear friends of mine have gone and at the invitation of the NSD and performed there, and people from NSD and other theatre organizations in India have come to theatre festivals in Pakistan. And the last, I think, was about 3 or 4 years ago. And I really wish that we could restart that process once this pandemic is over, of course, because those cultural exchanges are so critical, and for that we need the governments to give the visas. But I'm going to just come to Tara Krishnaswamy now and ask you to talk a little bit about your work and how it ties into this theme we're talking about. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. I'll refer back to both Saba's comments on hubris and ignorance, and also on Vani's comments on, bottom-up leadership as opposed to top-down leadership. I'll start off with the bottom-up leadership. In a democracy, we often talk of, the 3 pillars and the 4 pillars, including media. But the 5th pillar often falls off in our conversation. And the 5th pillar is actually supremely important. It is citizenship, active citizenship, right? A democracy doesn't really quite reach the level of maturity, or it doesn't even work between elections unless citizens are active. And after all, it belongs to us, right? And the government is our elected, sort of contracted employees, if you will. So, my journey towards activism actually, interestingly, started with politics. I was just a standard, upper middle class woman, wanted to study well, wanted to work. I did my master's in the US. I worked, lived there for a decade. I got back. So, I'm chasing the standard upper middle class dreams. When, I had some friends who said, look, a couple of friends are standing for elections, and look at their profiles. They're really admirable folk, and they could use some help in terms of writing, in terms of fundraising at the back end. And I was very tentative about it. And I said, okay, I'll help you because you're my friend, but it will have to be in absolute anonymity, right? I don't want my name out there, my face out there, my signature out there. I'll be a fly on the wall in the meetings. I'll make the notes. I'll make the posters at the back. I'll write the emails. I won't put my signature to it, right? And that's really how I started, by dipping my toes in. But slowly and surely, I got drawn into the process because of, one of the most amazing, fun things about politics and active citizenship is that it doesn't have the same walls that your professional work has. If you're, if you're in drama and, you're on stage, then that is your primary role. There is little influence, and over time, perhaps you can build influence, but you really, aren't dictating many other things about that. Similarly, if in my own professional work, and I'm a technologist, I look at software, right? I'm not looking at the marketing or the branding campaigns. But this is incredible politics and active citizenship because you're a volunteer. You can make posters, you can write press releases, you can go address the public, you can put an event together, you can mobilize people. So the sky is the limit for what you want to do, and it's purely based on your interest and the time you can spend. And if you just have, half an hour a week, that's fine too. If you don't have time at all for 3 months, that's fine too. If you're not making a career out of it, it really offers a lot of flexibility, both in terms of time and the kind of work that you can do. So once I got into active citizenship, I realized, while I entered through a political party, I realized the challenges of working with a political party and mobilizing for politics, right? There's a lot of constraints around that in terms of ideological constraints, in terms of, in general, the middle class not wanting to come out and participate actively. There's a label of dirty politics, right? And it's dirty because we refuse to clean up the muck. So I moved into civic activism through Citizens for Bengaluru in terms of sustainable cities, cities for women, urban transport, public transport, and so forth. And that is where really, I kind of shattered the glass ceiling for myself, if you will, in terms of being able to mobilize thousands of people to come out on the street, demand what we want, and get it done through the government. And once I did that, it built a tremendous amount of confidence to start something nationwide called Political Shakti, which is basically, Shakti is in strength, but also to mean for women, right? So it's a non-partisan group. Because India is a multi-party democracy, to say we want women to join across the political spectrum, parties to contest in elections and win. But basically, we want 50% of the parliament and the state legislatures to have women. And I agree with Saba about the hubris and the ignorance, because the myths around women entering politics, they're not interested, they're not winnable, when the data entirely flies in the face of that. Women are more winnable than men in every single election in India. The data shows that, right? And as Vani was saying, we have 10 lakh elected representatives at the local body level in the past 20 odd years. And statistically, even if only 10% of them were superlative, right, you would have tens of thousands of women eligible to get to the next level, but parties simply won't field them as candidates, right? Parties field about 5, 6, 7, 8% women as candidates. So the going against the grain, the hubris and the ignorance of the political establishment, which is 90% male, to even convince them to look at what the essence of democracy. This is not just about women. This is about making India a better democracy. You're leaving half the talent at the table, right? You're devising policies without % of the population. What do you expect that policy to be, right? No wonder we don't have proper running water and toilets in 2021. Right. So I think that's what, that's kind of the journey in a nutshell, if you will.
That's lovely. And I really resonate with a lot of what you're saying. You could be talking about Pakistan, but you could also, I think, be talking about Bangladesh and probably also about Sri Lanka and Nepal as well. And I think that the point that you and somebody else earlier had made about hubris, and I forget who it was who said that. I think Saba it was. I think one of the things that we need to really, what I would like to flag, is the idea of humility, of being willing to learn and not thinking I am right. And that is something that we can, of course, start instilling at a very young level when we start teaching children to use your words, to not act it out. And honestly, when I see the kind of political things going on around, I want to tell these mostly male leaders, can you behave like adults, please? We need some adult behavior here, And so with that, I want to come back to Peggy and ask her, when you're talking about to children, sorry, Peggy, I think you got...
No, I'm fine. I got a phone call because lots of things happening. It's a bad year in the family in Delhi, lots of things.
Yes. So I wanted to just ask you, when you're talking about all these ideas about, not about how do you inculcate humility in children, how do you get them to work and play together cooperatively to learn to use their words. And so a lot of the times, honestly, children who are taught well are teaching their parents at home, will you please not argue, can you please use your words? Can you, you don't have to hit me, you can tell me what you don't like. And a lot of the behavior we are seeing around us, actually, of the violence and mob violence and state-run violence or whatever it is, has to do with when there is lack of dialogue, right? When the dialogue ends. And what you were talking earlier about the apartheid almost in the classrooms, and not just classrooms, Peggy, we're talking about
society.
It's what they learn at home, right? So sometimes what they learn in school is at odds with what they learn at home, because maybe at home they're learning about violence and fathers hitting mother, and mother-in-law is bossing daughter-in-law around and stuff, and in school they're being maybe taught how to play nicely with each other, how to cooperate, how to speak, and how people are all the same. And then that they start to that clash when it comes in. And how do we move beyond that?
I think first we have to acknowledge and name the elephant in the room, which is that there is a large system around us which has its own imperatives, its own wishes. And yes, it's a patriarchal system, but it's much more than that. It's the whole global economy which wishes things to go in a particular way, which believes that information is there and all we need to do is access it. And adding to it brings in a very suspicious force that they don't like. That thing called creativity, that thing called humility, the ability that children have, which they don't see often in their teachers, but definitely in their best teachers, the ability to say, I don't know, let's find out. So I find what bothered me most in the COVID era and teaching via Zoom was the excitement first that, oh, wow, we have technology now, we can access every child, which is true. If a child was sick, I could phone the child at home and do an exam over a phone with a child who was in a village, yes, but it was one-on-one. And even in a Zoom class with all the kids there, it was one-on-one. And it was ultimately the most top-down experience because there's an inability for the system to recognize that the very best thing about a school is that the children are together, not that the teachers are there teaching individual children. So that there's something that we can expect to, some synergy that would work to create new options, better options for the future, that when children know each other and don't have built into them the compulsion to control, to be violent, to preserve whatever system is there, to think of new possibilities which perhaps suit them better. When we, for example, in India, I know even in villages, the school system involves teachers sent from the center who have to learn about the village languages, learn about why does a teacher have to learn? Why can't the teacher be from there? There's a tremendous amount of undoing that has to take place, which involves trust. And that is going to fly in the face of this large elephant in the room, which is the present system, which feels it's doing a jolly good job of extracting from the earth. And when you say, yes, that children and young people and women have been very active, yes, but in a different way. In my generation, I'm a generation older than the rest of you, we took on very big and unpleasant things. The Vietnam War was one of them, for example. The whole issue of communalism in India in the beginning. Now, I think our children have learned from watching us fail and be disillusioned that they should take on smaller things. The environment is small in that it doesn't spotlight particular evildoers. So children don't want to say talk about socialism, equality, except in gendered equality, which has been allowed to go below the radar. They haven't taken on the big things because they've been taught to be compliant, disciplined. So the education system has built itself up for moving on the same track when in fact options need to be explored still, because not just because children need it or women need it, but that the world is moving towards, as I said in my book, a stop sign. And the quicker we know that we have to be open to other ways in which the world can run, other ways in which, okay, a schooling system can run. Let us separate primary from secondary schools. Let's give children the opportunity to learn in a language that they truly do understand. Let us give villagers a chance to educate their children and be in charge of the teaching, things that they regard as truly important. All children really need to learn at the education, at the primary level, is how to read and write. And a little bit of number work. Everything else is time pass. And it can be filled in very locally in whatever language and by whoever in the village feels they have a stake in the environment around them. So I'm talking about truly bottom up. Even bottom up at times in terms of the children. I often would find that children say, couldn't we learn about this? Or what do you know about this? And I say, not enough. Let's find out. So they drag me along. But it takes a lot of courage to do that, because to let go of that hold that you know everything. I think Saba had mentioned that we have leaders who project themselves as knowing everything. In fact, it's far more ambitious and brave to say you don't.
I think I love what you said. Sorry to interrupt, Peggy, but we have very few minutes left. But I wanted to say, I love what you said, the words "I don't know, let's find out," and that's what you're talking about in all of this, the exploration, the humility to say that and with that, and you mentioned Saba, so I'll just come back to her, that in your work, in the field of entrepreneurship and building companies and stuff, how does this spirit then manifest itself?
Yeah.
Rather,
I
as
think,
opposed to when you say, "I know it, let me tell you what to do."
right.
As they say,
I think,
"Main batata hu," you know.
exactly. I think I want to tie this to what Peggy said actually about the bigger system. Actually, when we look at the capitalist world order, I think that there is a link there that we have to draw between, between the economic systems that we have built and who they have been built by and they've been built for. Who are the rules serving, right? Like, it's a system that we have created. And when Peggy talked about extractive policies, I think it ties really well to the tech world, actually my world, right? So even when you look at the startup world, when you look at corporate leadership, we know that last year, less than 3% of VC funding went to, female-founded companies. And I think that the style of leadership and what gets glorified and what gets highlighted and what gets perpetuated is also very, sort of masculine in a way. We live, if you look at last year's statistics, I think 20 million Americans lost their jobs, but 650 billionaires in America saw their net worth increase by more than $1 trillion. And of these billionaires, actually 365 billionaires have fortunes in technology, right? So the tech world is very much a perpetuator of exactly the stuff we're talking about. It is the sector that produces the most billionaires after finance and investment. It's the third most. So, almost half of the billionaires in the richest country in the world come from this world. And so I think it's very important to actually link this to what do we view as success and progress and, the capitalist world order that we've built and how it connects back to this, the bigger system that we feel we can't sort of go after or tackle. And I see in my world, when I look at, how entrepreneurs are groomed and who they look up to, that there's a cult of personality, right? There's a glorification of the traits that we are sort of talking about in the context of leadership. When you look at fundraising, the process of fundraising, when you look at what gets termed as success, when you look at particularly the idea of growth, right? So a startup is successful if it's growing at a certain rate. We talk about the hockey stick curve, and we talk about growth at the expense of, this is critical, right? Growth at the expense of people, at the expense of the planet. And the male cult, startup stars that we look up to, such as Jeff Bezos and Steve Jobs and Bill Gates. I mean, I'm calling out names here, but these are the personalities that I don't want to look up to, right?
Yeah.
These are the personalities who, my friends look up to in a lot of ways, and I used to look up to be very honest. But then, I started saying, okay, their companies are growing at phenomenal rates, but actually, if you look deeper, they would not be able to grow at this rate if it wasn't that they are, abandoning all guardrails, abandoning all boundaries, abandoning ethics, abandoning sort of the principles and practices that make companies sustainable and resilient in the long term. So I think that's what I see. And I want to, call our attention to business leaders that I look up to, such as Rose Marcerio, who's the ex-CEO of Patagonia. And she said, work is where the self meets the world. That is how she leads. She leads and she brings her complete self to work. She leads with her values. She leads with her beliefs and with her, sometimes idealistic worldview, which I subscribe to, because that's what we need in order to move from where we are to imagine something better.
Yeah. Thank you, Saba. I know that Vani has to leave, so I'm going to ask her to talk about, like you were starting to say something and I had to close you off over there because we need to move on. So we've been talking about humility, growth from the bottom up. We've been talking about alternative models of leadership. So do you want to add to that?
All I'm saying is that there are various paradigms of looking at leadership opportunities for women. I did start a program more than 2 decades ago where I was also very young then. And when I used to go into the villages and I used to see election campaigns, I used to realize that communicative skills is the biggest challenge apart from finding funds, for elections is concerned. And nobody ever thinks, no political party, even leadership institutes, which otherwise, work on women and, all kinds of things, all across the world, never think of, when a woman is actually starting out in the electoral arena and is facing a first election, how difficult that is for her, because there is no precedent to it. There is nobody who's given her that, opportunity of knowing what it means to address an election rally of 500, 5,000, or sometimes 50,000 people. So as we say, primary education for children is important. Similarly, at a primary level, educative tools, capacity building for women who are fighting their first elections, who want to run for office, is concerned. And that way, I think, despite the fact there are still very few women in the US Senate, at least the United States has invested itself by making democracy institutes and governance and leadership institutes, which invest, in creating opportunities for women who want to run for office. India is trying very hard to get there, but the fact that the 11.5% in the parliament still is not representative of the holistic whole of the women who can be future leaders. But the final thing that I was trying to say to you is, reservation or quota is a word that the West hates. But let me say, from my own experience, having worked with women and their political participation, at the grassroots level, it's a socially leveraging situation, and it's absolutely required. It's apt because it creates that paradigm which is so much required for women to enter the mainstream. And that is why the grassroots level experience I shared with you is a tremendous, tremendous affair. And I have so much more to say, but really I have paucity of time. But thank you so much for having me on, and let's keep the fire burning. That's all that I can
absolutely
say.
Thank you. And I hope you just stay. We're just going to close off in a couple of minutes. I'm just going to ask Tara to add a few words, and then we need to close this panel. Tara?
I think the current state of the nation, in a sense, makes us all more humble, especially the women, because the kind of battles that we are trying to fight for the soul of the country, it's pretty daunting. Last year, we had massive protests against the new citizenship law and the NRC. And I think it was the most humbling experience in making us realize just how much, how loud the citizens' voices needed to be, even then they weren't heard. So I think, if anything, right now we are living in an era of tremendous citizen humility. Unfortunately, not the politicians, not the powers that be, but citizen humility, especially women, because we are faced with a lot in politics, especially, and in society. We're faced with a lot of challenges when we come out. India has been rocked by a spate of misogynist commentary, misogynist activity and actions targeted against women in politics, regardless of what party and what end of the political spectrum they may be in. So I think there's just, it's impossible to, in a sense, wield arrogance, because every day someone's going to take you down. But that said, the other 50% of the population, I think there's just a lot of learning that needs to happen. There's a default assumption. When Kamala Harris won, I had written for Reuters that she carries the entire, womankind on her political shoulders, because every success, every failure, every step of hers is going to reflect on, American women in politics. But thankfully, about almost 50 to 100 women assumed various different kinds of roles, all the way from top to the middle, if you will, in the Biden-Harris administration, which does not happen in India, when even if a female, leader becomes a chief minister or becomes the head of state, she is either singular or there's just a handful of women around her amongst hundreds of men. So I think we have a long way to go. As Vani was referring to, the good news is there are plenty of leadership institutes coming up. There are a lot of young girls I teach regularly, a lot of young women who are interested in getting into politics and want to learn. But I think the flip side is also that we keep talking about capacity building for women and skills building for women, and we assume that men have those skills, which is entirely untrue. If you look at the status quo of where we are with everything from bad roads to bad water, after 70 years of independence, you have to ask yourself, what have the men really been doing?
Something needs to change. Something
needs to change. In fact, just the wholesale presence of women in politics will transform India. I have no doubt about it.
Absolutely. Agree with you. Thank you all so much. I know that Vani had to leave, so she's gone, but thank you all for being here. Thank you, Peggy, Saba, Tara, and in absentia Vani. And thank you, Pragya and Ekta for this for putting this great summit together. I wasn't able to attend the other sessions, but I'm going to definitely go look at the recordings and read the write-ups because I think we all have a lot to learn from this collective wisdom. I love what you said about it, Ekta. That I forgot the exact words, but I thought that the way that you envision this whole summit has been really wonderful, and I hope that it happens again, and maybe we can do it in person sometime. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hopefully next year maybe we can have it in person.
Thank you, everyone. And
thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And I just want to reiterate to the audiences who are still with us that the 2021 South Asia Summit led by women is over formally, but the cause isn't. So we must remember that, and that we aspire to create an economic trade bloc and a political union on the lines of European Union, and we visualize it as being led by women. So we hope you continue to engage with us and send us stories and references of more incredible women working for peace and social justice in South Asia and globally. And you can write to us at SAU at which is the acronym for South Asia Union at eShe.in. And of course, you can always drop us. You can tag us on the social media and drop us, a comment on under any of these videos as well. And we'll definitely consider all your suggestions. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for being part of the summit and for sharing your thoughts. And I hope to see you all very soon.
And so, sorry, Ekta, if I can just add that hope to see everybody very soon at the South Asia Peace Action Network.
Yes, absolutely.
End of the month, on the last Sunday of every month, we have a discussion on something or the other. Last time it was on 20 years of 9/11, after quote-unquote 9/11. And the last Sunday of October, it's going to be about climate change and human rights. So I hope that many of you who are here today will join us then as well.
Yes, let's carry the work forward. Thanks, everybody. Good night. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.